You're listening to The Money Hour with your host, Tina Mitchell, on Alternative Talk 1150 AM. Now, back to the show with local mortgage expert, Tina Mitchell.
You are listening to The Money Hour at 1150 AM, KKNW, the Saturday, December 11th show. You can also listen to my show podcast, Facebook premiere, or my show on the show YouTube channel. I am your host and local mortgage expert, Tina Mitchell. I'm here to help you build a strong financial blueprint 1 week and one show at a time. If you are hearing my show at a different time or day, you are listening to a rebroadcast. I'm here to answer any questions or connect you with the guests that I have on my show today. Please call the show at 1-855-400-1150. Again, that's 1-855-400-1150 or online at themoneyhour.com. And now in studio, purchasing in today's market, Sheri Putzke of Windermere Real Estate East, right here on 1150 AM KKNW. So Sheri, let's go ahead and get right into it. And let's talk about the biggest challenge that you're facing in your industry, your buyers are facing, I'm facing in the mortgage industry, because majority of my, a lot of my mortgages are purchases, and it's buyers and the challenge they're facing. Let's talk about what that is and how to make it a little bit easier.
Sure thing. Yeah. I think you touched on it earlier when you talked about the stats in Woodinville in terms of number of active listings. And by far, our biggest challenge is inventory or lack thereof. And so having to get ultra creative with either potential off-market opportunities or really dialing in and fine-tuning offers, doing a lot of research in terms of what the sellers are looking for, being prepared, and the ability to act very quickly when the opportunity arises.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about that on some of the questions I have for you. But you mentioned off market. Can you talk a little bit more about off market and how you can possibly have that as an option for one of your buyers?
Yeah, there's a number of different ways to approach it. And given that anybody that's representing buyers is experiencing similar situations, is becoming a more common practice. But sellers, in many cases, are receiving solicitations from buyers. And what's important in those solicitations to potential sellers is authenticity, not a blanket email to an entire neighborhood, but a specific letter about a specific property that really checks a lot of the boxes so that it seems genuine and sincere.
Yeah, what a great idea. Knowing exactly what your buyer is looking for and targeting homes that are similar in the area, the why behind they want to be in that area, connecting on the emotional side with them. And then you as the, I came off video there. You as the agent side, on the agent side and your expertise, then being able to let them know what the buyer would be willing to offer and what that could mean for them based on the equity that they have in their home, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. And sometimes I could imagine a seller really not, or a homeowner really not thinking about that and looking at it and going, oh my gosh, we could actually walk away with $200,000 or $400,000. Maybe we need to think about this.
Or more. If you haven't really, if you've owned your home for several years, or you're content where you're at and haven't paid attention to values, they can be very pleasantly surprised by their valuations.
Absolutely. So, Sheri, let's talk about how necessary it is to release earnest money to the seller to be more competitive.
Yes, we're seeing that more frequently. So essentially what that means is that the earnest money is part of the down payment, and many buyer's agents are using a strategy to release that earnest money to the seller prior to closing instead of at closing. And so it puts money in their pocket sooner rather than later, and also shows a high level of confidence in their ability to secure financing on their purchase.
Yeah. And so we're going to talk a little bit later about releasing finance contingency. This is just a level up. So when are you actually seeing people do that? At when in the time frame? How are you seeing that people are doing it as soon as they're under contract? They're immediately releasing that earnest money to the seller?
Yes, within a day or two in most cases. And there's different strategies. It doesn't need to happen on every occasion, but it's a matter of having that communication with the listing agent, understanding what the needs are for the seller or what the priorities are for the seller, and then making that happen.
Yeah, and you really need to. And this is another reason why you have to work with one of the best agents that has the expertise and one of the best mortgage professionals that has the expertise. I just had somebody come to me with 2 weeks left to close, and financing issues came up with their current lender. They actually had $100,000 that they had released in their earnest money to the seller. What you need to be aware of, and this is why you need a team on your side, is you have to meet the contract. So contract means you have to close based on when you said you were going to close. If the seller is not willing to give you an extension, whole nother conversation. I'm not going to get into the legal side and holding and keeping 100,000. Side note, Sheri, because I have been watching Annie Fitzgerald's videos. So it's kind of, crazy when you really get into what this could look like. But the seller gets to decide if they want to extend or not. So that's why it's important that you have, really the highest level of expertise that can navigate you through this process, because it's what you need to do to be competitive. So Sheri, there are so many homes that they have a review offer date. So I want you to talk about what that is. But even with a review offer date, they're actually taking an offer and that home's coming off the market before that actual review offer date. Can you explain what a review offer date is and what are options and why is this happening?
Yeah. So generally homes come on the market Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and oftentimes they review offers on Monday or Tuesday of the following week. And a strategy that buyers agents have implemented is presenting extremely strong offers prior to the review date with a very quick expiration, kind of forcing the hand for the seller to take an early offer. And we're seeing that happen more and more frequently. So what's important as a buyer is, one, seeing the properties as soon as possible when they hit the market, and two, having a conversation with the listing agent in terms of what the seller's intentions are. Just making sure some do want to wait for the review date and others are open to considering early offers. So then you need to plan, are we going to sit tight until the review date so that we don't show our hand in terms of what our offer is, or are we going to get something in there right away that the seller might be willing to take?
Yeah. So think about the emotional side with that seller and what you feel that you're willing to pay for that home. And if you go in and, hey, we'll give you another $100,000 right now if you take it off the market, waive the finance contingency, no additional down payment, addendum, and all these other things, the seller with the emotions attached behind could definitely see the benefit of pulling it off and getting it away from that. And then you can ultimately find you're getting a better deal on the house because it's not going to market and having 15, 20 plus offers coming in where they're just getting that price higher, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Sheri, let's talk about pre-inspection. So sellers, some of the time they're investing in a pre-inspection. So they're getting a home inspection on their home to see what the issues are with the home prior to listing it. And then they're providing that pre-inspection to the potential buyers. So are you seeing when sellers are doing pre-inspections, are you seeing that buyers are still getting their own home inspection? And would you advise them to get their own home inspection, or the sellers even allowing them to have 20 home inspectors come into that home? So what's happening in that space?
I'm grateful that we are seeing more and more sellers pre-inspecting because what it comes down to is timing. Oftentimes, if you have a 4 or 5 day market exposure period, it's not uncommon on hot listings for every single appointment to book up. And it's up to the seller and the listing agent as to whether or not they allow overlapping showings or not. So in some cases, it can be extremely challenging just to get an appointment. And in that case, the feasibility of conducting a home inspection on top of that, that's a 2-hour window versus a 15-minute appointment window, becomes even more challenging. So grateful for all of the sellers that are doing that. The other benefit of doing that is avoiding surprises for either party, or surprises for the buyer or the seller. But really, it's a case-by-case basis. Always best to procure your own inspection if you can as a buyer, but the fact of the matter is it's becoming more and more challenging.
Yeah, and we're not in this market because it's a seller's market, but back when we were in a buyer's market, because usually we don't have, I can't remember where we've really had a balanced market. It's either a seller's or a buyer's market. But in a buyer's market, I never understood why the seller wouldn't get a pre-inspection. And concern is they know what's coming up on the home and then they have to disclose it. Well, if they don't, they get an offer accepted. The buyer gets their own home inspection. The issue comes up, and now it's going back to negotiation. Again, we're not in that space now because
Right.
you're having to waive things
Right.
in order to get your offer accepted.
Right.
Sheri, the percentage of cash buyers is continuing to increase, and in our area, it's no different. How can you compete against a cash buyer that's coming in and they're going to close in a week and a half?
Yeah, I've got a great success story to share with you. Windermere has a program called the Buyer Capital Program, and it allows you to obtain financing for your purchase, but present yourself as a cash buyer. And yesterday we secured a home as a cash buyer. So we're closing next Wednesday, so a 1-week close. However, we were $150,000 lower in purchase price than the competing, than the highest offer. So there were a total of 8 offers. We were $150,000 lower than the top one, and we got the home because of the cash buyer program. So buyer capital closes on the home, and then the buyer's financing kicks in a couple of weeks, and then they close on the financing piece of it, but they take possession of it next Wednesday. So it's a really fabulous tool to be competitive in this crazy, crazy market.
Absolutely. So as a mortgage professional, I know the importance of pre-approval and the difference of a pre-approval from one lender or one mortgage consultant to another. Can you talk on how this impacts your space and your buyers?
Yeah, buyers really need to have their ducks in a row from the financing side of things. Having a conditional approval versus a pre-approval is really important, not just for themselves, but sellers look for them. And basically what that means is that their file has been reviewed by an underwriter, and it's kind of a stamp of approval that we as listing agents and also as buyers agents look for, because it gives everybody a higher level of confidence that we're going to get to the finish line.
Yeah. Yeah. So aside from rates, what else do you see, and how lenders vary from one to the next, or an individual mortgage consultant? Because you can see 2 mortgage consultants working for the same company and completely different experience.
Absolutely. And it's similar to most businesses. Honestly, it comes down to communication. Unfortunately, real estate doesn't only transact Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. So being available, updating pre-approvals, answering questions, and then being able to provide those conditional approvals, because it does take a little bit more legwork on the lender side. And then furthermore, having local underwriting is also helpful, being able to talk to your underwriters or walk down the hall and chat with somebody to problem solve, instead of having a 3-hour time difference or some other scenario where it's more challenging to work through issues.
Yeah. So Sheri, what about waiving finance contingency? Because majority of buyers, that's really what they have to do in order to be competitive. Can you talk about what that is and the importance of it?
Yeah, and we are seeing that on more transactions. And basically, it's again having that conditional approval, being 100% committed and all in, but understanding the consequences too. If you don't have that financing contingency, you are still obtaining financing. Your offer is just not contingent upon it. And the biggest piece of that is the appraisal component. When you escalate significantly above the asking price, in some cases, the value doesn't come in on the appraisal. So you need to be able to be prepared to offset that difference or restructure the loan, still within the time frame for closing, to make that happen. And that's a biggie. And nobody has a crystal ball. We don't know always what the appraisal value is going to be at. We can do our own comps and have a good idea, but need to be prepared for worst case scenario if you do not have a financing contingency.
Yeah. And even if you're not waiving your finance contingency, which as Sheri said, it means you're just waiving everything. There is a new addendum that's came into the contract, which is the additional down payment addendum. And
Right.
that's making you strong that you're saying you're willing to pay a certain amount over what the appraised value comes back at. Fortunately, I'm not having huge issues with appraisals. There's been a couple that have came in low here or there, and I do a lot of volume. So our appraisers are doing pretty good in being able to come up with value. But let's talk about, when that appraisal does come in low. How are you coaching and navigating with your buyers on that?
Well, we're definitely
Or
having
your seller, because it can be an issue on both sides, right?
right. Yeah, as a seller, we're looking for buyers that are waiving that, and as a buyer, it's just being prepared. So having additional reserve funds to offset that difference, or working with a really savvy lender that can restructure that loan to offset the difference on the lower value.
Yeah. And a great restructuring, if you're doing let's just say a 20% down payment and the appraisal comes in and it's 10% low, or let's just say 15% low, you would think that you would need to come in with another 15% down payment. You don't. You just increase your loan amount to take it up to the maximum 95% loan to value. You're coming in with a little bit more cash because you're doing a buyout of mortgage insurance. So you're going to pay to buy out the mortgage insurance so you don't get stuck with monthly PMI. And your mortgage payment is going to be exactly the same. So really close to the same amount of cash because you are financing the same amount. The only thing that changes is the loan to value. So a lot of times when I run those, you run those analysis and look at what that looks like up front before you make an offer, because that's what I do with my buyers is having a conversation with my real estate agent on what they think there might be a potential issue. Let's go ahead and run what the worst case scenario could be where this strategy would work. And then buyers can see those numbers and go, oh, well, that's no big deal. I don't have an issue with going ahead and waiving the finance contingency or increasing on that down payment. So it really is definitely there's some creative options. So you don't have to come in with that additional cash. And then buyers may ask, well, what's the big deal then? The only difference is you have licensed appraiser that says that they can't support the value that you paid for the home. It doesn't mean that it's not worth that, because you and maybe 10 or 15 other people were willing to pay pretty close to that as well. And what the value of the property is what people are willing to pay. But being that the market's moving so quickly, there's not the data or the closed comps that can be used for that appraisal. Now, there is room for the appraiser to make comment on how they're increasing that value based on the market movement, but it doesn't always work, right?
Right.
Yeah. So great conversation, Sheri. It's always a pleasure to have you in studio, and I appreciate you coming back in and sharing your expertise with my listeners. Will you give your best phone number that they can reach out to you?
Absolutely. I can be reached on my cell at 425-749-6703.
Wonderful. Sheri, thank you so much.
Thank you.